Yes, it is week 12, week 11 in the books. We are getting ready to move on as we've got a short week doing this as early as possible on a Tuesday evening. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Thank you for listening to us here on the No Coast Bias NFL podcast. Farzin Vasugian, Robert Zaglinski, and Danny Troutman here. Three of us in tonight for really another exciting podcast here. Last couple of weeks have been crazy. The second half to the NFL season has really just been absolutely fun to watch, and it's starting to get better. We're seeing so many shifts in the playoff standings, and guess what? All of the bye weeks are complete, so we're really at the final stretch now. The sprint is on, and a lot of NFL teams, like we've mentioned, and we'll get more into it later. A lot of NFL teams still in this. I don't remember a time at this point in the season, going into Week 12, where so many teams were so close to one another to the point where really a lot of teams have a realistic shot at winning a division or a wild card spot. It's really at the point where it just requires even just a small winning streak and a small losing streak for another team. So we're going to get right into it. But first, the big news coming out of this week. In fact, this was reported Sunday evening by NBC's Mike Florio that Broncos quarterback Peyton Manning now reportedly the backup quarterback, as the Broncos will move on with Brock Osweiler. We'll touch on that later tonight. But Peyton Manning reportedly plans to play next season, quote, even if it's not for the Denver Broncos. Now, Mike Klis from the Denver Post, a longtime Broncos reporter there, he reported basically refuting that article, saying that Manning was not too thrilled, or at least someone close to Manning had told Klis that Manning's not too thrilled with that article report, and that as of right now, the future is uncertain for Manning. Guys, in 2012, there was a battle for Peyton Manning. 4 years later, will teams even bother? Because Manning, look, let's face it, he is statistically the worst quarterback this season. Yes, he is Peyton Manning, and sure, he could be a great quarterback, a great backup, pardon me. Of course he's a great quarterback, but a great backup and mentor a young guy. But let's face it, Peyton Manning is not going to play one more season to help polish and help a guy unfold his career and flourish. He wants to win another ring, wants to win that second one before he hangs up the cleats. Robert, I know it's early right now because a lot can happen from now until March when free agency begins, but really, who would even bother to get Peyton Manning at this point? I don't know if a team desperate for a position under center would even want Manning at this point.
Given his level of play, I'm not sure anybody will really be interested in him, but as is the case every year, the NFL is a quarterback-starved league, and a somewhat decent team, why wouldn't they take a shot on Manning, especially, say, maybe the New York Jets, who have Ryan Fitzpatrick and Geno Smith, the Houston Texans with T.J. Yates. There will be teams that might be interested. I'm not sure how worth it is, but there's a reason these old quarterbacks play forever, because there isn't exactly a great influx or development of other young, talented quarterbacks that can take their jobs in any essence. I mean, Peyton Manning, I'm not sure how realistic the second ring prospect is, but if he wants to play in 2016, someone's going to let him play.
What about you, Danny? Do you see him even coming back for 2016?
I do, and I kind of got the same idea that Robert had. And he's not going to go to a roster to compete for a job, right? He's going to go somewhere, and on his terms, he's going to come back because he says he will, and he's going to want to start somewhere. And like he said, I mean, there's some other teams. There's a couple other teams. You look at like the Niners, who flirted with him 4 years ago before he went to Denver, and they're going to trade away or waive Colin Kaepernick, and unless they draft somebody coming out, they got Blaine Gabbert with the reins to that team, and you got teams like the Jets who are a mess there. You know, is it going to be Fitzpatrick? I mean, you saw the other day when he got hurt, Geno Smith wouldn't even let him play, and so there's a handful of teams, and I think he'll come and he's going to start somewhere, and whether he has a miracle comeback like he did from his couple neck surgeries a year ago, who knows? But he's going to go somewhere and he's going to play because he wants to, and he's stubborn, and more power to him. He's not going to demand the type of money that he did this last go round, obviously, because no team would be that foolish. But he's going to go somewhere and he's going to play, and I don't know. I'd like to say he'll do better next year than he has so far this year, but who really knows? I did see a stat today earlier on the internet that said Charles Woodson and Peyton Manning are both 38 years old, and they both lead the league in interceptions right now, which I thought was pretty cool.
Oh, I did not know that. That's a great statistic there. They're both from the same draft class too, as is Matt Hasselbeck, who we'll get into later, who's been playing very well for the Colts. But in terms of Peyton Manning, I think he could come back. You know what's scary, guys, is there's a chance Peyton Manning might win his second Super Bowl as a backup. Look, I mean, Brock Osweiler, who knows what he's going to do. He's obviously 1-0. He got that big win over the Chicago Bears to snap that streak, but that's a possibility at this point, and none of us really saw that coming. So I think Peyton Manning does come back. I think there is a team that will take a shot for him. It's just we know Peyton Manning is not going to want to go to a bottom-tier football team. He's going to want to go to a football team that's in position to win a championship. However, does that team that's ready to make that step to make a championship run, are they going to want to make a run for Peyton Manning? So you have two sides, two different parties wanting different things, and I think it's going to be hard for Peyton Manning to even get what he's going to want next season. So, you know, if you end up on a team like, the Jaguars, the 49ers, a team that's just desperate for a quarterback, you know, all you can do is hope that Peyton Manning is going to dominate, because at this point, I don't see him getting what he would want in 2016.
What I think is an interesting question, and I sort of wanted to bring up to you guys. Brett Favre, similar type of player that played forever, really never went away to the point of nausea for really the entire football world. But he had a sort of blind spot in his career, or for lack of a better term, where he wasn't really playing well, where he looked like Manning, he looked like Dunn, he was throwing 20-plus picks a year, the Packers were floundering, they didn't have the same kind of defense as Denver does now, so there's a difference, but similar types of play in their late 30s, and then Favre goes to Minnesota, sort of his career rejuvenated for this one season, looks like the Favre of old, the MVP Favre of old, slinging it around. You guys think Payne can do that?
I would almost expect that more than to see him disappear into obscurity. Like the way he recovered after his neck surgeries and the type of player he is. I mean, whether he changes his style up or I don't know what he's going to do, but I'd almost expect him to go somewhere, whether it's in Denver or somewhere else, and impress. I think he'll do well, and he's going to hang it up on his own terms rather than kind of being chased out of the league. But
actually, the more that I think about it, he probably already had that season where he had the blind spot, and then he had the 55 touchdown season. But still, regardless, Farzine, what do you think?
Well, here's what's funny. Being in Kansas City, a lot of Chiefs fans keep saying that the Chiefs are one hit away from winning the AFC West, referring to possibly sacking Manning and injuring him because he's old and that he's getting worse every single year. Guys, I remember in the 2009-2010 season when the Colts went to the Super Bowl to play the Saints, ESPN brought out a statistic that at that point in time, Manning had missed only one snap in his entire career. Now, that's excluding, holding him out in week 17 or 16 because the Colts had the number one spot locked up for a majority of the time. That's excluding that. There was only one snap that Peyton Manning missed because of injury. Now, this year, he's been forced to be benched. He's been injured. So you see that. Bottom line, coming back from that neck surgery, as you mentioned, guys, he is a tough guy. And seeing him go out there and continue. Now, this year, he has kind of just rolled over and let teams sack him when he knows there isn't anyone wide open and he sees that pass rush coming. So you can tell Peyton kind of fears getting hit. But still, at the end of the day, this guy's still playing. He's going out there, has won some games this season. Granted, they haven't been pretty, but he's helped the Broncos win at times, despite playing really bad this season. Broncos are 7-2 8-2 for a reason. So I think Peyton Manning. I still think he's got that toughness. I think he'll come back for one more season. Like I said, I think it's just a matter of whether or not he will get what he wants, and I don't think that will happen. We'll see what happens with Peyton Manning. I think this is going to be a crazy second half for the Broncos. They do have the Patriots coming up. Like I said, we will talk about that, but how long do the Broncos go on with Brock Osweiler as a starter and Peyton as a backup? We'll touch on that in our key games later tonight. But, guys, let's move on to Monday Night Football. Probably one of the worst officiated games I've ever seen. Now, before we get into this and talk about who got screwed over or not, I just want to make clear that, if anything, both teams got bad calls in this game. However, I think the bad officiating favored Buffalo more than it did New England, and New England won this football game. So I don't want to hear any complaints about how Buffalo got screwed over because of the officiating in this game. Don't get me wrong, Buffalo got a couple of bad calls, but that the whistle where Brady did not go out of bounds, got it off to Amendola. I mean, that's a touchdown right there for Amendola. No one was there to stop him, but the officials blew the whistles, and even though Amendola had an open spot to go to the end zone, the Bills players, keep in mind, they hear that whistle, so they stop. As you all know, play till the whistle's blown. So even if you want to review that, how do you consider that? Hey, look, the whistle was blown. The players stopped. Were right there because the play was called dead. And on top of that, the Bills had a couple of bad calls right there in the end. More notably, Sammy Watkins caught a pass inbounds, rolled out of bounds, but the officials let the time roll and the game was over. So, again, those are just two of a couple of examples. Now, Robert, you and I were discussing this before we went on the air. There was some bad officiating this entire weekend, but, guys, there's a lot of bad officiating in sports overall, in general. Now, I don't want to sit here and make excuses for sports teams because I think there are a lot of factors that play into a sports team winning and losing, but I think you've still got to hold these officials accountable. We see the NCAA, the NFL, suspending and fining players and coaches, trying to punish teams for what they do. Let's start holding officials accountable because they make a lot of crucial errors, and not that this decided a game. This didn't decide who won or lost, but it was still an ugly game. Mike Tirico had a quote after the game, quote, "What a screwed up night of plays and officiating this was." That's how bad it was, Danny.
Man, it was brutal. It was a painful game to watch. Also, I have Tom Brady on two of my fantasy teams, and I lost both of them. So, by a factor that I would have won, but that's besides the point. It was a brutal game, man, and it's I did see some stuff earlier today, basically defending referees despite these bad calls that we're seeing. Maybe it's that they're so obvious and there's so many more viewers and it's scrutinized so much more on ESPN and your other networks and stuff like that. But I did see that something like 97% of all calls in the NFL are accurate, and now especially that replays kind of into effect, they feel like 1.5% of that remaining half of that remaining 3%, they get the calls right. So, and then I did see also that they have like 3 tiers that the NFL officiating ranks their officials into, and when they have something above that threshold, they're bumped up into the next tier where their team starts to get playoff games and Super Bowls and that sort of thing, that crew, and then if it's below that threshold, they're punished, whether it's a fine or whatever the case is. I don't think they do that, but they're punished to basically they're not rewarded with those extra games. And there's the middle tiers 2, and then there's 3, and if you get into 3, they start kind of looking at demoting people and possibly kicking them out of the league. So I haven't seen that happen. That's just some hearsay that I saw somewhere on Twitter today with, I believe it was one of the ex-officials in the NFL. But regardless, I mean, the last 5 years, it seemed to get worse and worse, and maybe it's because it is more highly scrutinized, but it's, yeah, I mean, you are affecting games, and people can say all they want that the game's played, between the lines, and it's not won and lost on the referees, but some games have been, right? And we've all seen them, and whether it comes down to the last play or a play in the first quarter, it shouldn't matter, and there's been some rough ones, that's for sure.
Yeah, Packers fans can definitely agree with what you're saying. No question about
Yeah.
it. That was a replacement refs, but look, even with the replacement refs, people were begging for these officials, like the real officials, to come back. But guys, even those guys make a lot of errors, and we complain about them. Yet we wanted them back. Robert, where do you stand on all this?
Well, so first, before I go on, well, the games played between the lines. The referees are between the lines, right, Danny? So there is that argument. Um, to me, it's just like the eternal issue. This isn't something that you can really fix with sports. It's human error. You have human officials, and in a sport where so many things come down to really judgment calls, pass interference, contact on the quarterback. Uh, the rule book is so complicated that what's to say that you or I or anybody else would make a difference even with all of the exact same amount of qualifications and training? Um, if you add in all there's the conversation around replay and streamlining things to correct the human error, but then you're extending the game. Then you're taking away the pace of the game, the excitement. You're taking people out of the game. You can, in my mind, it's a huge issue for the NFL, and I like what Danny said. Danny said that maybe it's just being scrutinized more, but I'm not sure how much they can fix it. And if we're remembering, I mean, there's been some awful calls where teams have lost downs, where teams have lost scores. I remember there was a famous Thanksgiving game between the Steelers and the Lions where Jerome Bettis called heads, and the Lions were awarded the first possession and scored and won in overtime. You know, these aren't exactly new issues. They're just scrutinized more, and it's not something I think that can really be fixed easily, or at least something that we could figure out.
Here's my beef: is that a lot of these calls cannot be reviewed. And I think that's what frustrates me, is because a lot of coaches want to review certain things. And look, there are so many rules in a rule book that sometimes the officials miss things. I mean, they do. It just happens that way. And even the coaches need clarification as to why something can or cannot be reviewed. And then they realize, all right, well, we have to accept this because this cannot be reviewed. All I can do is just yell at this official and let him know he screwed up. So there's this big separation where the officials, there are a couple things that they don't even know, but they don't even get punished for it. Richard Sherman was trying to defend his teammate Marshawn Lynch last year, saying that, you know, if all the players should talk, then so should Roger Goodell. And I absolutely agree. Roger Goodell doesn't do a lot of media, and I'd like to see him do a teleconference with some of the top writers, or maybe just some of the top NFL media guys, because I want to hear his take on this. I think he does such a great job of hiding behind all of this and sweeping things under the rug because he doesn't do a lot of media. So I'd like to hear his take on a lot of this, because I think something can be done about it. But look, I think your fans, you've got the top product. You get so many viewers and so many sponsorships. I think you at least owe an explanation, because the fans deserve it.
They do use. I was just watching on the NFL Network. I mean, they use Dean Blandino, but Dean Blandino, it's not like he's always going to err on the side of caution towards his officials and saying that there wasn't much they could do. He's not exactly going to criticize them or sort of offer a succinct explanation that probably verifies anything. For me, there are simple fixes. I mean, you mentioned that they do owe this to the fans and to the people that have invested so much. I mean, this is a sport by all measure owns a day. I'm quoting a movie that maybe we could quote in a later podcast, but the NFL owns a day, literally owns a day of Sundays.
Yeah.
And they just don't seem to have this this measure to be able to fix this issue. Minor fixes, like I mentioned, maybe clarifying what a catch is, maybe simplifying that rule to take that out of the referee's hands, make pass interference less of a judgment call. Maybe for roughing the passer, you have, or face mask, you differentiate between 5 and 15-yard penalties more. But other than that, they need to work on and do their own kind of research to be able to fix this.
Danny, any final words on this before we move on?
No, I'm good. It's been bad. It's been rough. That's all I got.
Yeah. I mean, something does need to be done about this because, and Danny, I know what you said. I agree with you. Even though there are a lot of factors to winning and losing, I think these officials, it should still be done cleanly because these guys are there. I mean, I don't want to say they're like the hosts of a game, but they do control the game. I mean, without them, we don't have games, and we need them to keep things in order and then let the players do the rest. But instead, we kind of have a third party in these games sometimes, and that takes away from the fun of it sometimes. You mentioned fantasy football. You mentioned Tom Brady. Think about sports gambling, and I don't know what the line was for this game, but think about how much that plays into effect. And look, it's kind of like injuries in sports. You have to play with what you're dealt with. Same thing with gambling. You kind of have to play it, but at the same time, you would like for it to happen cleanly, I guess. So
it was 7 points.
So there you go. There you go. So you'd like to see a different outcome in that. So hopefully the NFL does do something about it because, like we said, a lot's invested into it. So many people love the sport and watch it. They hate to see this. Imagine if this was a Super Bowl. I mean, this would be talked about for a long time. But speaking of the Super Bowl, a lot of teams trying to make a run for the postseason. What's that?
Don't jinx it.
Super Bowl. A lot of teams right now in the hunt for the postseason. And then, guys, as you know, once you're in the postseason, it's a new season. A lot of teams trying to make a fight for that championship, that Lombardi Trophy. Let me just give you a rundown of the AFC and the NFC. The AFC, New England's a clear-cut number one, probably arguably the best team in the NFL right now. Sure, you could say the Panthers, they're also tied right there, but I think New England, because of what they have and how dominant they've been, I think they're the number one overall. But in the AFC, they've got the number one seed. Bengals and Broncos both suffered 2-game losing streaks, right now competing for a 2 spot. The Steelers probably will end up with the 5 seed unless Cincinnati collapses. In the AFC South, the Colts and Texans tie for first at 5-5. The Jaguars right behind them at 4-6. The Kansas City Chiefs, guys, they were 1-5 and were the worst team in the NFL. They had the number one pick right there at the time. If the season ended after week 6, the Chiefs were going to be number one in the draft. 5 weeks later, they own the number 6 seed after winning 4 straight games. So they've really come from the dead this season. You have the Bills, Jets, and Texans at 5-5. The Raiders, Dolphins, and Jags at 4-6. Real quickly, the NFC side. Panthers number 1. Cardinals are showing a strong competitive prowess right now with the 2 seed. And the NFC North, the Packers just took the division back from the Vikings. Both teams at 7-3 right now. In the NFC East, Giants barely holding on at 5-5. Redskins and Eagles are 4-6. Cowboys 3-7 right now. 3-0 with Tony Romo as a starting quarterback. Make whatever you want with that. Right now, they are actually favored this week. We'll touch on that sometime in this segment. Falcons are a 6 seed with a 6-4 record. Buccaneers, like the Chiefs, they've also come alive lately after a 1-3 start. Seahawks still waiting to go above 500 for the first time this season. Redskins, Rams, Eagles, Saints, and Bears 4-6. The Bears started 0-3, and they're now getting competitive. And look, Robert, you may disagree, but even they have a shot right now. John Fox has done a better job, and so has Jay Cutler playing on the field. Robert, I'll start with you. What do you have to say about the playoff picture right now?
What sticks out to me is something you mentioned. The Chiefs, by all measure, were left for dead. And now they're sort of solidifying themselves as the 6th seed. Their defense is actually playing up to the standards that I thought they would in preseason, as I picked them to win the AFC West. I don't think they're going to overtake Pittsburgh in that first wild card, but they're on a roll. They have an easy schedule in front of them. I'm not sure how much of a playoff run they're going to make, but they look like that talented, overall molded roster that I thought that they would be. Andy Reid, for all the criticism he gets, he knows how to bring his teams together. Big games or playoff games is could be a different story by any argument, but Kansas City, after literally being left for dead, looks like a completely different football team, and I know you can attest to that.
Yeah, 5 weeks ago, everyone wanted Andy Reid fired, and I kept on my podcast, the Chiefs Zone, I kept saying, look, that's not a good idea. That's not the right answer. That's not the solution to this. 5 weeks later, if the season ended today, they're going to go visit Denver, who they just beat 2 weeks ago at Mile High Stadium. And Danny, I know you and our editor-in-chief, Derek, you guys were in Kansas City when the Chiefs got this streak going. I'm kind of curious, when you were there to see the Chiefs in that game, what did you see from that team that might have looked different from that 5-game losing streak?
You know, it was an interesting game for sure. I mean, the Steelers had Ben Roethlisberger was out, and they had Landry Jones in there playing, but they still looked like a pretty good team. But the Chiefs, their defense was solid, especially with the way that Pittsburgh's offense has looked so far this year, with Antonio Brown, who is over 1,000 yards through 6-7 weeks, something like that, something outrageous. Le'Veon Bell and even D'Angelo Williams looking great. So with their high-powered offense, I was actually pretty surprised with how well their defense performed. And Alex Smith does what Alex Smith does, and he manages the games, and he's great at it. I mean, you know, dump off passes and 200-yard games all season long, and you know, they're starting to throw touchdowns to wide receivers for, you know, that's something they hadn't done in so long. But no, I agree. I've been really impressed with what they're doing, and you know, I wouldn't at all be surprised to see them sneak into the playoffs and win a game or two. I mean, they've been showing up, so.
Robert, you said that they have an easy schedule. They don't have a team above 500 on their schedule for the rest of the season. Now, Buffalo was just above 500, so that's the best team they have on their schedule to face. They do have the Raiders twice, who have shown some competitiveness. But here's the thing that I guess naysayers will say about the Chiefs, and even people in Kansas City who are still being critical. People are saying the Chiefs haven't really been impressive because they've beaten either bad teams or bad offenses. Now, obviously, some bad offenses referring to the Broncos and the Steelers because they were without Ben Roethlisberger, and then bad teams because they beat the Chargers this past week, and I'm running the Detroit Lions. Here's what I have to say about that. The Chiefs handed those 4 teams their worst losses of the season in terms of point differential. So not only are they winning, but they're winning big. They're doing something. They could have easily just dropped dead and continued to compete for that number 1 draft pick, but they're fighting right now. And if you're a Chiefs fan, all you can do is just ask for a chance. And lo and behold, the Chiefs have the 6th seed, which I did not see coming at all 5 weeks ago. I did see that schedule. I didn't think it would result into this, but it has. Let me ask you guys this, because this is a bad year in the NFL. I was asking a buddy of mine this because, you know, as Chiefs fans, we've been scoreboard watching lately. There are a lot of teams that really have a realistic shot at making the postseason. No one's mathematically eliminated usually at this point, unless you're just winless. But at this point, we have so many teams that are still in the hunt, and a lot of people are saying that we have a lot of quote-unquote bad teams or a lot of mediocre teams, and people are saying that's a bad thing. I strongly disagree, and I'm saying this from a business perspective. That's a great thing because, number one, you have all these markets, all these fan bases that are still watching their games, and on top of that, they're scoreboard watching. They're watching other games. I mean, I was interested in Denver and Chicago because, hey, what if Denver collapses? Maybe the Chiefs all of a sudden can compete for the AFC West. You know, Bills and Patriots. A lot of people in Kansas City definitely wanted to see that outcome. You know, I'm sure a lot of people in Chicago, Robert, I'm sure a lot of them were watching Green Bay and Minnesota after the Broncos and Bears game. I think that's great for business because even though we might see a 7-9 team or an 8-8 team, maybe 2 teams that are not even above 500 make the playoffs, that's great for the ratings because a lot of people are watching all these games. I'm kind of curious what you guys have in terms of your perspective on that with the way the playoff picture is looking.
I mean, it's fantastic for the NFL by any measure that people are still going to be watching, right? But in the end, it's bad football. It's just bad football. I mean, the NFL to me, I mean, I love it. It does draw you in more. It does allow you to enjoy the game more, and a lot of the games become marquee, and you sort of pay attention around the league more. But the league is incredibly top heavy. It's incredibly top heavy. It feels like It almost feels like there's a couple 10-0 teams. There's a really good Cardinals team, maybe a sleeper Packers team, and a Broncos team with a good defense, and then just everybody else in the muck. And I don't know how I feel about that. Imagine if the league perhaps was actually more competitive playing football. It feels like the muck has been created because no one can really separate from each other because they're just not good enough. They're not consistent enough. They don't have the talent, or they don't have the quarterback. Whatever reason, it's not a problem. It's not that big of a problem for me. But I just wonder why it's become like this. I don't really ever remember the league being this top heavy. At least in my opinion.
You have a lot of top tier teams, and obviously headlined by the Patriots and the Panthers right now. And then you have a bunch of second-tier teams. I mean, usually second-tier teams, at this point, we would consider the Steelers a second-tier team, but I think they're kind of more – I think they're either the worst first-tier team or the best second-tier team, however you want to picture that. But we have so many teams, like we said, in the hunt, and a lot of teams that are second-tier, and we've never seen a season like this, maybe not since 2002 when there were 13 teams in the AFC that could have been eliminated or needed a win or a tie to win a division or get into the playoffs. Danny, what do you have to say?
I think it's great, man. There's, what do we say, 7 teams that are within one game of the second wild card slot in the AFC. You got 3 teams that are within one game in the NFC. One thing that, and I don't know the exact stat off the top of my head, but you look at the last decade, the last 10, 15 years, and wild card teams are, you can't even say shocking people anymore because you've got wild card teams winning Super Bowls and going to the NFC and the AFC championships. And as much as I don't really care about the Jags or the Bills or the Raiders, I can't say I wouldn't be entertained as hell to see them go, not only to the playoffs but to make a run and really shake some people up, because like you guys said, it does seem very top heavy, right? You got your clear
Can we see Blake Bortles and Brock Osweiler in the AFC Championship game?
I think that would be awesome.
Let's not go that far.
No, but you got these top heavy teams and you got your obvious division winners, but then there's still a lot of major division battles too, like your Vikings and your Packers in the NFC North and teams like that, and so there's not only some division battles, but the wild card is just going to be crazy. And I would like to see Blake Bortles and the Jags go to the playoffs and beat up on a team like the Broncos or somebody that's considered in this top tier. I'd be entertained by it, man. I think it's good.
Well, here's what's funny. If the Jaguars do go to the playoffs, they're probably going to do it by winning a division, so they would be hosting a playoff game. That's how crazy it would be. Robert, did you have something you want to add?
No, I don't think I was knocking. I don't think I was knocking the league too much, saying it's top heavy. It's still interesting to watch, and I enjoy monitoring the playoff picture. I just sort of wanted to gauge off of what you guys think, because we discussed before the show, Pittsburgh's probably going to be locked in as the 5 seed by any measure, right? So, and we have the Chiefs in that spot right now. We're week 12, about six weeks to go. Who would you make? You guys make your case like in a quick sense in the AFC for that 6th spot. Who's going to finish in that 6th spot? Because I think that the top 5, other than the AFC South, is more or less locked down.
I mean, the Chiefs have impressed me the past 4 weeks. Like I said, those 4 teams, they've handed them their worst losses of the season. The best team left ahead on their schedule is the Bills. They also have the Raiders twice. I think they do split with Oakland because I think Oakland, they're going to let a fire under their tail. They know they've got to step it up soon. But look, the schedule favors Kansas City so much. I think they get the 6th, and I think the Steelers, they're kind of the heavy 5 right now. I think they're going to build a gap between the 5 and 6 seed, but I think it's going to be those 2 teams.
I'd say, like you said, I was just looking at Kansas City's schedule too, and I think they are the favorite probably to get that 6, but I'd really like to see the Raiders get in there. I'm not a Raider fan by any means, but the weapons that they got and kind of as historically bad as they've been the last God knows how long, I think it'd be entertaining. I'd like to see the Raiders sneak in there if they could somehow, but I think it'll be the Chiefs. But I'd like to see the Raiders get in there.
Yeah, the Raiders did own. I don't remember if it was the 5 or the 6 seed prior to losing to Pittsburgh, but they've been competitive. The offense has been a little quiet lately, so they've got to turn it around. We'll see what Jack Del Rio decides to do with that offense in the coming weeks. But we touched on the Chiefs. We touched a lot on the Steelers and the 5 and 6 wild card spots. Danny, I'll go back to you. What other topic intrigues you with the playoff picture?
Really, I mentioned it briefly. That NFC North to me is huge. The Packers, they won last week, kind of like I think we all predicted, but
Except Farzine.
except Farzine, they won, but they're coming. I don't know. They're kind of on the downstroke. Eddie Lacy actually looked pretty decent this week against a strong Minnesota defense, but the way Teddy Bridgewater is, he's got the highest completion percentage in the league, I believe. I'm pretty sure that's true. And Adrian Peterson's in fine form. He's really wowing everybody like everybody expected. I think that's going to be an awesome battle to see who wins that division.
Robert, I know you follow the Bears very closely as a Bears fan. That NFC North, it's definitely been going back and forth lately. The Bears have kind of made some strides here. They're one of the teams that are in the hunt. A lot has to happen in order for them to make it into the postseason, but the Bears have significantly improved lately.
Yeah, they're showing a lot of improvement. I think John Fox and his staff, Adam Gase, the offensive coordinator, Vic Fangio, the defensive coordinator, they've stabilized and maximized a team that is really undermanned. The Bears aren't the most talented team in the league. They still have a lot of holes defensively. They haven't really been healthy offensively all season. They were playing their best receiver, Alshon Jeffrey, a superstar on Sunday, for example, and their superstar tailback, Matt Forte. But the staff has seemingly been able to maximize and even maximize quarterback Jay Cutler, who's not lighting it up, but he's playing some efficient special football. You watch him, for example, on Denver working out of the pocket. He's creating these plays against the NFL's best defense with receivers that would probably play for Appalachian State in Division II football. In all honesty, I'm not going to say the Bears are in the playoff hunt. I think they needed to win the game against Denver because now they probably have to go 5-1 or 6-0. And looking at their schedule, they have the Packers, who I'm not sure if I'm going to exactly commit to them winning on Thanksgiving, but they have the Packers, they have San Francisco, they have Washington, they have Minnesota, Tampa Bay, and then Detroit. They have the talent to compete with anybody in the league, but they don't have the talent to, or rather, they have the staff to compete with anybody in the league, but they don't have the talent to finish each of these games in order to grab a playoff spot. Now, they're going to push everybody they play. They're going to push Minnesota in their second game. They're going to push Green Bay, maybe even beat Green Bay or Minnesota. For the Bears, it's more about a measure of creating a culture for next year, and that's sort of been the theme in Chicago this season.
Jeremy Langford's really impressed the hell out of everybody, I think, and you can tell Jay Cutler's been improving by the way the media has been making fun of him a lot less the last couple of weeks, so that's always a good thing for them.
You mentioned the schedule, Robert. Not only are there good teams, but there are also teams that are fighting for a playoff spot. Green Bay not particularly fighting for a spot. It's more so the division than trying to get into the playoffs. So they definitely want to win the division and possibly get a 2 seed if that's still up for grabs, depending what happens with Arizona. And then the Vikings, I think the loser of that battle between Green Bay and Minnesota settles with that number 5 wild card. Number 6 wild card right now is Atlanta. You mentioned the Redskins, another team that's competing. This is that NFC East right now, guys. Giants are not holding on by a big lead right now. They've been really up and down. They started 0-2, if I remember correctly. Redskins and Eagles 4-6. So much has been made about Washington and the direction they're going into. The Eagles, what they've done this year with Chip Kelly in the offseason and how it's not really panning out, but they're still in the hunt. The Cowboys undefeated with Tony Romo. Again, it's only 3 games. Make whatever you want out of that. The Cowboys are favored to beat the Panthers. Earlier this week, the line was 3, and right now it's only 1. But that NFC East, it's always been one of the more fun and competitive divisions. Even though it's sloppy, it's still competitive nonetheless. Who do you guys see coming out on top in the NFC East? I don't think the Cowboys go undefeated. I don't care if Romo's 3-0. You're just not going to go undefeated just because Romo's 3-0. I think they've dug themselves a really big hole, and I think the Giants still come away with that division. I don't think any other team in the NFC East makes the playoffs.
I would agree. I mean, I think the Giants win it, but honestly, Dallas is 2 games back right now, and like you just said, they're 3-0 with Tony Romo, and Darren McFadden's been surprisingly impressive. I don't know if that's the right word. Surprisingly not bad as he has been basically his entire NFL career. They got Dez Bryant back. They got Tony Romo, who's been seemingly healthy for about 3 weeks, just waiting to get in there and make some plays. So I think the Giants win, but I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas snuck up on those teams and ended up winning that division with 2 games back and 6 games to be played. So yeah.
What about you, Robert?
I'll make the same argument that I made for the Bears. I mean, the Giants, they're 5-5. They're good enough. They took the Patriots to the wire a couple of weeks ago. They're good enough to go to the wire with any team in the league. Well, who's to trust them to finish the job when they have the leg up and win the division? Who's to trust them to finish the job? I think they will. But Dallas was also a team at the beginning of the season that everybody thought was a Super Bowl contender, one of the best teams in the league, a really good offensive line, a revamped front seven, rejuvenated Tony Romo coming off of one of his best seasons last year. And they have all that back now. And they don't have the easiest schedule. They have like you mentioned, they have Carolina on Thanksgiving. They have a game in Lambeau in a few weeks. They have to play the Jets, the Bills, all teams fighting for their own wild card spots. But the Cowboys are a different team with Tony Romo, and like Danny said, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, if they went 5-1, say lose to Carolina on Thanksgiving, and went 5-1 the rest of the way to capture the East, I wouldn't be surprised because 8 wins honestly might win the East given the Giants' inconsistencies.
And 2 of those games are against the Redskins, so.
Yeah, so you already have probably 2 wins locked up actually. So.
Yeah, that just shows you how crucial these division games are if you're in such a tight competitive division. And then if you're a wild card team, those conference games really start to matter more and more. I'm looking at the AFC picture right now, and I'm noticing the Texans are 5-5. Out of all the non-playoff teams, I'd love to be the Texans because they're 5-5 tied with the Chiefs, and then they're 5-5 tied with the Colts. Now, they don't lead the division, nor do they own a wild card spot, but if you're Houston, there are multiple ways for you to sneak into the playoffs, so that's got to be nice if you're Houston. My last comment on the playoff picture, Tampa Bay I think is a team worth keeping an eye on. Jameis Winston just had the game of his life, and I think possibly going to give Mariota and maybe a couple other players a run for Offensive Rookie of the Year, but even bigger than that, the Bucs have taken 4 of the last 6 games and now stand at 500, just like Seattle, because we all saw that coming before the season. Like I said, Seattle's still waiting to go above 500 for the first time this season. I think that's definitely worth keeping an eye on. That's really all I've got to say in terms of the playoff picture and all the craziness that we have going on. Do you guys have any last words that you want to add in before we move on to our key games?
Like you just brought up Tampa Bay. I was really surprised this year to see Doug Martin kind of snap back to the Doug Martin we saw his rookie year and not since. That's been pretty impressive to me, and Jameis is a lot better than I would have expected, and he's got some weapons there in Tampa. So they're a fun team to watch, and you're right, they're sitting pretty at 500 right now with Atlanta ahead of them for the last wild card spot without Devontae Freeman right now. So there's some opportunity there for sure.
And you mentioned Seattle. Nate and I mentioned a few weeks ago at our mid-season to a dark horse team to sort of make a run. If Seattle's going to do it, they basically have that 6th spot open. I don't think anybody trusts the Falcons to finish off in that spot, given how they lost to the Colts and backup Matt Hasselbeck, who's somehow still in the league. If Seattle's going to do it, if they're going to take their spot, if they're still the Super Bowl contender that they seemingly believe within, it's now, and I'm going to be interested to see if they can.
Yeah, we covered so much in this segment with the playoff picture. So I don't think we've ever had such a loaded discussion covering so many teams. Just wait for Week 17. I can see this Week 17 season being the Week 17 where there are a lot of teams, whether it's for a division or trying to just get into the playoffs overall as a wildcard team, there are going to be teams that need multiple teams to lose or tie. It's going to be one of those weeks. The NFL, and I'm really excited to see it. That really draws a lot of attention and interest from NFL fans. I think even though, like I said, even though it is kind of a sloppy season, I think that still makes for an entertaining finish to an NFL season because a lot of fans are still locked in to see their teams. So we'll see how that goes. A lot to really look forward to. Even if your team's kind of struggling right now, still some hope. Some teams kind of have a slim chance, but all you can ask for is a chance of some sort. And we'll see how things finish in the final few weeks of the NFL season. Guys, let's move on to Week 12. We've got 5 games this week. We'll keep it brief. We normally keep it to 3 to 4 games, but there are so many games, especially right now with what we just discussed with the playoff picture. A lot to look forward to this week. Let's start with Thanksgiving. While you guys will be eating, stuffing turkey in your face, all that good stuff. 4-6 Chicago at 7-3 Green Bay. Really just a historic rivalry here. It's going to take place on Thanksgiving. Brett Favre returns to Lambeau to have his jersey retired. A lot to look forward to in this game. Robert, I'll start with you in this one. Who do you have coming out victorious?
I've been wavering, and I know it would be the logical thing to pick Green Bay given how the rivalry has gone, but I'm going to go full Mike Ditka, and I'm going to pick the Bears. I don't know. I think
there you go.
I think I just they're competitive. They've been competitive. This is their rival. This is the night one of the guys that tortured this franchise for almost 20 years is getting his jersey retired. There's a lot of sentimentalities and cliches behind the game that I think they really want. I think they want this game as sort of a signal of that the rivalry is shifting back. I don't know. Just call me Ditka, really. Just call me Ditka.
Fair enough. I'd like to. I really would like to side with you and pick the Bears. I really want to, but I can't. I've been really impressed with what Langford has done so far, and like I just said about Cutler, he's been not terrible. He's been pretty good, and their defense is actually pretty good. They got some great wide receiver weapons there. I think it's a close game, but it is one of those where basically record, talent, everything goes out the window because it's a division rivalry game, and it's one where these two teams hate each other probably worse than about any other two teams in the NFL. I think it'll be close, but being back in Lambeau, I think the Packers squeak it out 31-30, but it'll be a great game, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be closer than a lot of people will think, especially with how well the Bears have played lately and the Packers have slipped, though they did just snap that losing streak against Minnesota. But I think the Packers do finish on top, and I do agree with you, Danny. I think it's going to be somewhat of a high-scoring, very close game. It's going to come down to the wire, and I think it's going to make for a good holiday game for fans to enjoy. Next up...
Jay Cutler game-winning touchdown pass. I'm calling it right now. 30.
Oh, there you go.
30-23. I forgot my score. Jay Cutler game-winning touchdown pass. I should add that. You'll see. I'm totally rational.
5-5 Buffalo at 5-5 Kansas City. This is crazy because Kansas City, as we mentioned, they were the worst team 5 weeks ago, and 5 weeks later, the Bills are no longer in the playoff picture, at least one of the 6 seeds. Whereas the Chiefs are. The winner of this game gets the 6th seed. For the Bills, they would just be taking back the 6th seed. For the Chiefs, they will build a big gap. And, of course, beating the Bills, you own the tiebreaker right there. If the Chiefs and Bills are tied at the end of the season, and if the Chiefs win, the Chiefs get the last laugh because of the tiebreaker rule, which is, again, very crucial. This almost feels like a playoff game. It's a divisional game, rivalry game. It feels like it at least. Both teams desperate for a win right now. Bills have been on and off, like I said, have dropped 3 of their last 5. I'm going to go with Kansas City. I think the Chiefs have played so well lately, and I don't know why it would change now. I think the Bills will challenge them the most compared to the last 4 teams who the Chiefs have faced and have dominated, but I think the Chiefs still come out on top at home. Robert, who do you have in this game?
I'll agree with you. I think Buffalo's offense has slipped a little bit. I think I'm not sure how much I trust Tyrod Taylor. He's an effective game manager, but given how Kansas City's defense has been playing as well, this will be a tight defensive battle. Kansas City is at home. They have that sort of slight advantage. There's no reason to think that the Chiefs don't come out on top. Probably 17-14.
I think this will be a blowout, honestly. I think the Chiefs kill them. I like Tyrod Taylor and what he does. I think he's a pretty good quarterback, but he's hurt now. He's probably going to play. I mean, but even if he doesn't, how effective is he going to be? I mean, we saw how little they trust E.J. Manuel to come take over the reins because Tyrod was probably playing that last series or two last night at about 30%. He's injured. The running backs are okay. Carlos Williams he's a bruiser of a back, and I like him. But Sammy Watkins still hasn't panned out to his full potential. He drops the ball a lot. I like what he does. He's one hell of an athlete, but he's not fully where he's gonna be in his career. And Kansas City, like I said, they're with Charkandrick West and company there in the backfield, and Alex Smith as a game manager. I think the Chiefs just kill them here. I think I got 27-13 Chiefs, and I don't even know if it's that close.
Yeah, Spencer Ware actually had to fill in for Charkandrick West, and he got 96 yards. So the Chiefs really have been lucky with running backs. They've had 3 running backs really just step up this season. Also worth noting, completely forgot, Dontari Poe, the nose tackle, got an offensive touchdown last week. He officially has the record for heaviest player to score an offensive touchdown, passing Refrigerator Perry. Nothing more sexier than a fat guy touchdown. I love fat guy touchdowns.
He has a long way to get to the fridge. Come on, don't be blasphemous.
I knew you were going to say that, Robert. All right, back to the NFC North. 7-3 Vikings. They're going to go visit the Atlanta Falcons at 6-4. We touch on these teams quite a lot, both wildcard teams. The Vikings have a realistic shot at winning the North, whereas the Falcons don't. It just depends on whether or not the Panthers collapse, but that's very doubtful at this point. Guys, I'm going to go with the Vikings because I feel like they've been the more competitive team. I think that loss to Green Bay is definitely going to wake them up and let them know, hey, look, there's still a long ways left to go, a lot of fight left. And if you want to take this division back from Green Bay, it's got to start happening now. I think they're going to win in this game. I think it's going to be a 2-possession game. Atlanta's really slipped lately. They started off and had a really great story, especially with how bad they were last season, but the Falcons have not played really well lately, and I think they do drop this game, and that could open up the number 60. But for now, I'm taking the Vikings to take back the NFC North. No, at least not necessarily in the near future because I did have the Packers winning, but I think they're going to stay in that competitive spot. What about you, Danny?
I agree. I got the Vikings 10 points, 34-24. I think they're on the up and up. They've looked pretty good, and I think Atlanta's been looking worse and worse. Tevin Coleman was filling in for Devontae Freeman this week, and he looked good for a couple carries, but then really tapered off and didn't look all that impressive the remainder of the game. Matt Ryan hasn't looked what we have come to expect out of Matt Ryan. They got Julio Jones, who's a game changer. That guy's ridiculous. But beyond Julio Jones, I'm not sure Devontae Freeman's status this week. But I don't know. I think I got the Vikings by 10 points.
Yeah, I'll have to say the Vikings too. they still have one of the best defenses in the league. They have Adrian Peterson against, by all accounts, a weak front. But I'm looking at the stats, guys. Actually, I know we didn't want to delve away too much from on these picks. But the Falcons have the 10th best defense in the NFL in yardage-wise and scoring. So I'm not sure what the issue is. I'm not sure if it's turnovers. Obviously, I think the Vikings will take this by 30 to 20. But is it Matt Ryan? Is there some kind of cohesion missing? I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure. That's a topic for another day. I just think Minnesota's the better team.
Both of them wild cards right now, and they really need a win to either advance themselves or just at least not fall behind in the playoff picture. Minnesota won't fall behind too much if they lose, but they would be tied with Atlanta, and that could set Minnesota to being a 6 seed. So you can kind of see how crucial it is for both teams either way. But let's move on to the Steelers. We all agreed that the Chiefs were going to beat the Bills. Now, the Chiefs earlier this year beat the Steelers. If the Steelers lose to Seattle, the Steelers fall back and would settle with a 6 seed possibly. I don't know what the situation would be if other teams outside of the playoff picture would win in the AFC. But if the Chiefs win and the Steelers lose, the Steelers do fall in the standings. Now, the Seahawks, again, like I said, still waiting to go above 500 for the first time this year. Steelers trying to maintain that wild card spot. And Ben Roethlisberger, he came back sooner than we thought with that injury, and he's been helping the Steelers in any way possible. I'm going to start with you, Robert. Who do you have winning this game?
The Steelers, and despite the playmaking of Thomas Rawls, who seems to be taking Marshawn Lynch's job in Seattle, you mentioned earlier they haven't been over 500 all year, and they haven't been showing enough consistency. I mean, they beat San Francisco, but I'm sure, as Danny can attest to, how impressive is that at this point?
Very impressive.
Not that too much shots fired, Danny. I don't know. There's no reason for me to trust Seattle. Their offensive line is still having issues. They haven't corrected that. Russell Wilson is the most hit and pressure quarterback in the league. They're not exactly playing a barn burner defense in Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh, for all their injuries, for losing Le'Veon Bell, for not having 100% Ben Roethlisberger, they seem to have everything together. They seem to have all their youth coming together. And I'm really liking what they're building. I mean, to me, they seem like a dark horse for the Super Bowl in the AFC if we could have one. Steelers 24, Seahawks 17.
I like your 24. I had a Steelers 24 and 22 for the Seahawks. I hate the Seahawks because I'm a Niner fan, like you mentioned. But like you said, man, they got weapons filling in Pittsburgh. Those guys are ridiculous. The way Roethlisberger came back and the way he's been playing, he really got Antonio Brown back involved to the point where we expected him to be this season. Martavis Bryant came off his suspension, and that guy's just been ridiculous. He's a monster. All he does is score touchdowns, it seems like, and he's one of the fastest guys on the team. Wheaton, and D'Angelo Williams is looking as good as he's looked in about 4 or 5 years. He lost a bunch of weight, and he's been great. And with the Seahawks, it's like you said, they lack consistency. Some weeks they look great. Some weeks, Clay Matthews is yelling at the 49ers that Kaepernick's no Russell Wilson because Russell Wilson's that good. But Russell Wilson is that good half the time, and he looks really impressive. And the other half of the time, and maybe it's because he's getting hit as often as you said. He's getting sacked like crazy. Their offensive line is declined, it would seem, and I don't think they're quite the team they have been the last few years. Thomas Rawls did amazingly fill in last week for what Marshawn could have brought to the table, but and he looks like a pretty impressive back so far. I haven't seen a whole lot of him, but what I've seen, he's been pretty impressive. But I think the Steelers squeak this one out, 24-22.
I agree that the Steelers are going to win, but I think they're going to do it in bigger fashion. I think it's going to be a blowout. I think at least by 3 possessions. Seattle's defense is just not the defense that we all really know and are familiar with. You mentioned earlier, Danny, that they were without Roethlisberger against the Chiefs. Maybe it could have hurt Pittsburgh earlier this year, and because of that loss, that could be crucial in case those two teams are tied. But you have Roethlisberger, and you mentioned the suspension with Bryant. I'm a huge fan of Antonio Brown. I think he is the best wide receiver in the NFL, and I think statistics may also back that up, at least from last season, last 2 years. But when you have Roethlisberger and those targets that he has, Heath Miller, Antonio Brown, Bryant, don't let the statistic fool you. The Steelers are 13th in passing, but as you mentioned, they've had some players absent this season, and without Le'Veon Bell, they're going to be pass heavy. So I think that 13th statistic, that ranking, it's going to go up by the time we finish up the regular season. So I think that passing game is definitely going to challenge Seattle and really rip up Richard Sherman in that secondary. So I think the Steelers do cruise and win this by at least 3 scores. Let's move on to our final game, Sunday Night Football. This one should be fun and probably interesting too because of the whole storyline with Brock Osweiler coming in. He got his first win last week against the Chicago Bears. Could have gone either way. Chicago was right there too, just needed that 2-point conversion. But right now, You've got the 10-0 Patriots, who again were challenged by the Buffalo Bills, so anything can happen at this point, even with an inexperienced Brock Osweiler and a really good Denver defense. Can Denver's defense limit Brady, or does number 12 impress us again and improve to 11-0? I really like Denver's defense. They've done a great job, but I don't know if it's going to be enough to hold off the Patriots and hand them their first loss. I think the Patriots will hold on to win. I think it's going to be a narrow one. I think it's going to be low scoring, similar to what we saw this past week. I think the Patriots do pull it off, 17-16 in this one. Well, what about you, Danny?
If you'd asked me 2 days ago, I'd had an easy answer for you, and I'd have said the Patriots win relatively big. Now, what we saw last night, the Patriots, obviously, who have been basically untouchable offensively this year, really struggled against Buffalo, and they've lost God knows how many weapons they had on the team. They're without Dion Lewis. They're without Julian Edelman. Amendola was shaken up a little bit last night. We'll see how he pans out. But those guys, I mean, they were playing Aaron Dobson and guys that, you know, the Patriots are one of those teams where they basically can plug in any receiver and still succeed. But we saw some weakness last night once they're finally getting down into their lower tier of wide receivers, and LeGarrette Blount and who's the other running back, White, were in last night, and they really kind of they really struggled for the first time really all season. Denver's offense obviously is kind of a question mark now with Osweiler at the reins, but he's impressed so far. They still got Emmanuel Sanders should be back this week and playing and actually contributing, I guess I should say. They got Demaryius Thomas. Osweiler can chuck the ball. That defense is still ridiculous, so if we can see, we saw what the Bills did to the Patriots. Denver could really do a hell of a lot more, I'd say. I do have the Patriots winning, but like you said too, Farzine, a real narrow margin. I'm going to say 23-20 in a defensive battle of sorts, I guess.
Robert, you got the last prediction of the night, my friend.
Yeah, I think that's something that can't be discounted. Brock Osweiler is still incredibly inexperienced for all the time he sat behind Peyton Manning. He's been sitting behind Peyton Manning for 3 years. Last week was his first start. And no one prepares for quarterbacks in their first meetings to confuse them and scheme against them like Bill Belichick. I mean, look at what Bill Belichick has done to Andrew Luck over the years. So Osweiler, even if he's on his home turf, Belichick will have wrinkles to throw at him. The defense, for everything that New England's shorthanded, I think this is something that hurts them in the postseason when the defenses get better, when the schemes are better, or rather when the game plans are better. But in the regular season, like Danny said, they can plug and play guys. They can formulate a game plan that Belichick sees that can attack the NFL's best defense. There's no reason to think for me that they don't leave this game 11-0, especially against an inexperienced quarterback, where Osweiler will probably make more than a few mistakes, even if he could prove to be an eventual effective game manager. I'm going to have to go past 2016. The defense will keep it close, but nobody beats Belichick's game plans.
No word yet on whether or not Peyton Manning will be active for this game or not. We'll see as the week goes on. I think it might be a game-time decision for Peyton Manning, but if he is active, I just think that's something to keep an eye on, because if Brock Osweiler's struggling, do you go to Peyton Manning? I'm sure that'll be pondered during the game on Sunday Night Football as it goes on. Guys, another really exciting show, so much to talk about, and I think that's the way these kinds of shows will be, especially during the second half of the season, because not only are we familiar with how things are shaping out, but then we start seeing all the teams that are competing and in the hunt. Another fun show, and hopefully we can do it again next week. Well, of course, we'll have an even better idea of how the playoff picture will look, and I'm sure we're going to revisit that discussion again. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Thank you so much for downloading and listening to this podcast. We'll talk to you next week. Big thanks to Robert and Danny for joining me. I'm Farzine. See you then.